You know, there are two highlights for the Israeli ambassador when it comes to serves in London. One is presenting the credentials to the Queen. The second is speaking in Kinlос for Yom Ha'atzmaut. So I'm really delighted to be here with you. When I watch you, the Bnei Akiva, Chanichim, and Madrichim, I remember my time when I was your age. I was Madrichat Shevet Ma'alot, Berehovot. I was Komonarit overseas in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm so proud in the spirit you bring to this special day. So please say thank you to Bnei Akiva tonight. Thank you. As a Bnei Akiva graduate, I can tell you that two things will guarantee our future. One is the young generation. Every time I come and walk into a room and I see people my grandfather's age, I'm very happy to see how much people here from this generation care about Israel. But if I won't see you and your generation, then we know we're doing something wrong. So I'm so happy that in Kinlос tonight, we can see the next generation that really loves Israel and appreciates this amazing miracle of the state of Israel. So now I'll go back to the formal speech. Chief Rabbi, thank you so much for your moving words yesterday. I was deeply moved from your words on Yom HaZikaron ceremony. Rabbi Lawrence, it's always a pleasure here in Kinlос. Ladies and gentlemen, Lord Kastenbaum and Lady Kay, all the great friends of Israel. This moment is very special in the Israeli calendar and in the Jewish calendar, when we switch between Yom HaZikaron and Yom Ha'atzmaut. When we do that, we think about all the people that sacrifice their lives so we all can be here and cherish this freedom of having sovereign country and a Jewish state. I want to mention one person. The Masa program is giving the opportunity to brothers and sisters of lone soldiers to speak about their brothers and sisters. And this week, it was the brother of Eliyahu K. was delivering a very moving speech about how much when we remember the people we love, we don't just need to remember the good things. We need to remember them as a whole. And he was speaking about his brother, Eliyahu K., a grandson of a very beloved rabbi here, Rabbi Shlomo Levin, that was killed in a horrible terror attack in the streets of the Jewish holy city. And when we think about his innocent, beautiful face and the face of the evil, we know how much more is to be done in order to make sure that every Jew will feel that the sovereignty, the ability of us to defend ourselves is not something that we should take for granted. And we should work hard to make sure that every Jew will be proud to walk in the. Today, we also think about the journey that the Jewish people went through from the beginning of Israel, a very small country, with a very, very weak economy, almost socialist market, to this mega success story of a country that has a strong economy, that is so powerful in all aspects. I know that when it comes to celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut, we usually love to speak about all, the achievements that Israel had: science, technology, culture, military. But I want to speak about a different aspect today. I want to speak about the secret power of Israel. The secret power of Israel is not its military force and not its technological force. Its secret power, it's its spiritual force. The spiritual part of Israel is something most of the people don't speak about. We established a Jewish state not just to create another country that just speaks Hebrew. We created a country to be really all Goyim. And when you see the field hospital being built on the border of Ukraine, you really appreciate that. But this is something that happens on a daily basis. I know that one of the former years, Rabbi Mervis, you were speaking about the spiritual power that Israel was giving many of the rabbis here and many of the youngsters here that came for a year to study in yeshiva and for the girls to study in midrasha. I think this spiritual power is the power of Torat Eretz Israel. Torat Eretz Israel is something very special. Arav Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook was speaking about Torat Eretz Israel as a renaissance that our Jewish studies will go through. And I think today, more than ever, we can see this renaissance happening everywhere. When we see the kibbutzim in Israel today, most of the kibbutzim that were established on secular basis are today building more and more synagogues. Why are they building new synagogues? Because the second generation of the kibbutz people, they're already closer to Jewish tradition than their fathers were. So you can see this Jewish renaissance everywhere, in the north, in the south, in Jerusalem, in the kibbutz, and in the cities. And now let's go back to the real power of the state of Israel. How come a small country, surrounded by enemies, managed to do what other small countries and modern countries couldn't do? How come Israel today is one of the biggest success stories in the world? So I want to take you behind the scenes to a very special moment when the state was established, based on a very famous book called 3 Days in May. So let's go back into the cabinet office of David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, needs to make historic decision. He needs to declare about the state of Israel when the British mandate leaves Israel. Was it an easy decision? Of course not. But the amazing thing I want to share with you is that his own cabinet was against this historic decision, something that most of the people really don't remember. So the date is 12th of May. Lifnei Hei Be'iyar, go 2 days backwards. Gimel Be'iyar, very close to where we stand now. David Ben-Gurion brings his cabinet to a small room in Tel Aviv, and they need to make historic decision. And look at the dilemma that is inside the room. Golda Meir, at that time, gets back from a special mission, meets the king of Jordan, Abdallah, and she says, well, unfortunately, I have very bad news. The Jordanians are going to join all the other Arab countries, and they're not going to let us stay independent. And David Ben-Gurion is looking at her, and he says, so what can you bring else to the table of this cabinet decision? And all the others are starting to speak up. Moshe Sharet, the foreign secretary, the foreign minister, says there is an American offer, and this American offer is not to declare on a Jewish state, to go on a ceasefire, and basically, so far, just in the meanwhile, the sovereignty of Israel that was supposed to become the state of Israel will be under international law, under the UN supervision. David Ben-Gurion is terrified from this idea, but his whole cabinet is against him because the balance of the power is against the very small army of the Jewish state. So he goes back and he thinks what he can do in order to convince his cabinet. So he brings some military generals in order to convince the cabinet that they have the ability to win the war. And those military officers, do you know what they say? It's probably even. There are 50% that this operation will manage to create a valid state. But there is a big possibility we will lose, because at the moment our army is very weak. So put yourselves in the shoes of David Ben-Gurion. The Americans are against you. The international community is against you. Your own cabinet is against you. And you need to make a decision. There are just 2 days till the British mandate is over. So what would you do? So at this very special point, David Ben-Gurion gives one of his amazing leadership speeches. And he says, you need to think about the Jewish history, and you need to think about the future of the Jewish people. It doesn't only think about the people who are standing in the room or just the people that now live in Israel. He thinks, and he sees in his vision, 13 million Jews from all around the world that can come to Israel and make it a stronger place and a stronger country. And then he comes and says to his cabinet ministers that are not so happy to go with the decision. And then he tells them, this is once in a lifetime opportunity. The whole history of the Jewish people is now watching us. 10 people are sitting in the room, and they probably need to make the most important historic decision was ever made. And slowly but surely, he manages to bring one person one person to support his decision, and then another one. And eventually, the most important historic decision about creating the state of Israel is made with the benefit of one voice. And David Ben-Gurion is behind that. So here comes one of the biggest leaders that the Jewish people ever had, and he needs to go against everyone and to make a very unpopular decision. And when you're asking those ministers, you're asking them, the historians are asking them, because they were still alive for a long time, how come you were hesitating of creating the Jewish state? So they said in a very simple voice, they said, we thought the cost will be too much and eventually we will lose. And this is exactly what the international community was thinking. The cost was too much, and eventually this small Jewish country can't really survive in the Middle East in such a hostile region. But we know who won when history needs to judge. David Ben-Gurion. The justice was with the men that decided not just to check how much weapons we have, but he was checking the spirit. He was checking the spiritual will to fight for the future of the Jewish people, not just for the future of the small state of Israel or the beginning of the reborn state of Israel. And David Ben-Gurion historically will be remembered as the person who made the right choice. But when you look at the cabinet protocols, you realize it was not such an easy decision to make. Let's move forward. This spirit of making the right decision, but not the popular decision, keeps on follow all the Israeli leaders. Later on, when we move on 1949, the UN decides that Jerusalem is not going to be the capital of Israel. Jerusalem is not going to be the capital of Israel. People are shocked. How come this UN decision goes against the historic truth? David Ben-Gurion makes a decision to move all the Whitehall, the Israeli Whitehall, all the offices, and build the Knesset in Jerusalem. And this is a decision he makes, again, against all the international community's offers. And today, Jerusalem united is the capital of Israel. And as Ben-Gurion said, it always has been and it will always be. Let's move forward in time. And we get to the year 1977. We all know about the heroic Entebbe operation. But when you get back to the cabinet room, you realize something really surprising. The two people in the room that were against a military operation in order to rescue the people that were hijacked by terrorists, the Air France plane, 105 Jews and Israelis, were actually Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister, and the defense minister, Mothe Gur. And the person, the chief of staff, and the only person who was actually taking a position to go for impossible military operation was the defense minister, Shimon Peres. And again, against all the odds, Israel is creating one of the most heroic military operations because it stands for the spirit and for the values of the Jewish people. And we decide not to surrender to terrorism. And what happens eventually, we lose one of our highest officers, Yoni Netanyahu, as you all know. And the military operation will be called since then, Mivtza Yonatan. But we are doing the right thing. Move forward, 1981. Menachem Begin is in power. And Menachem Begin needs to make a very important decision about the security of Israel, attacking Iraq because of the fact we have an intelligence that shows they're developing nuclear abilities. The Americans are against him, and in a certain point, they decide to boycott military aid to Israel and not to deliver it. And then he goes to the people of Israel and he says, friendship with an ally is important, but the interest of my people is more important. And this is how leadership in Israel created, time after time, the right thing that was never the popular thing. And I think today, more than ever, we should follow these brave leaders, those brave leaders that are playing against the rules, that are saying, let's think in perspective. Let's think about the fact we're coming from a deep history. We have so much more to achieve. And we need to see in perspective the whole Jewish people, not just the people of the state of Israel. And I think today more than ever, we are following those giants. And we try to adopt today on Yom HaAtzmaut this bravery, the fact that they made the right decisions, even though they were really, really unpopular. So I'm very proud to stand here as the representative of a small country that is very brave, and also it's the only Jewish country in the world that cares about Netzach Israel, about the future of the Jewish people. I just would like to finish with my most favorite part of the Siddur. It's a beautiful prayer that Rabbi Herzog was putting together when the State of Israel was established at that Friday on Hei Be'Iyar. אבינו שבשמיים, צור ישראל וגואלו, ברך את מדינת ישראל ראשית צמיחת גאולתנו. הגן עליה בעברת חסדך ופרוס עליה סוכת שלומך. ושלח אורך ועמיתך לראשיה, שריה ויועציה ותקנם בעצה טובה מלפניך. חזק את ידי מגני ארץ קודשנו, והנחילם אלוהינו ישועה ועטרת ניצחון תעטרם. ונתת שלום בארץ ושמחת עולם ליושביה. ותחנו כל בית ישראל פקודנה בכל ארצות פזוריהם. ותוליכם מהרה קוממיות לציון עירך ולירושלים משכן שמך. בעזרת השם, next year in Jerusalem, you all welcome to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut together with all the Israelis in the streets of Israel. חג שמח.